At 19, I started my own business, paid off all my debts, and bought a house with cash. Until my family sued me for taking the life my sister deserved. I'm Nico, I'm 27, and if there's one thing I've learned about family, it's that they can think they know everything about you, but they don't actually know who you are. When people hear the summary of my life, started his own business at 19, paid off every debt he had, and later, bought a house with cash, they picture a self-assured man who always knew what he was doing. The truth is less glorious and much more ordinary. I was the kid who fixed remote controls with toothpicks, who cleaned his shoes with dish soap, who learned very early on that if you wanted something, you had to find a way to build it with what you had. We didn't have much, and I don't say that with a tone of pity. It was just the backdrop of my childhood. Mom had jars for everything. A jar for sugar, one for rice, and one for loose screws. Dad had his habits, like other fathers have fishing trophies. Neat rows of phrases he pulled out when he needed them. A man doesn't complain. Pay your debts first. And the one he repeated most often, don't get too big for your britches or you'll trip. There were 4 of us in the house. Mom, Dad, my younger sister, Talia, and me. The running joke, or at least that's what I thought it was when I was little, was that I was the oldest by responsibility but the youngest by priority. I was in charge of mowing the lawn, taking out the trash, greeting the cable guy, and watching the pets when Aunt Drea left us her noisy Pomeranian. Talia, for her part, had a different orbit. She's 24 now, bright and quick with words. She's one of those people who makes waiters laugh and makes teachers lean forward to listen to her. When we were kids, she would wander through the kitchen as if the house owed her the sunlight. She wasn't malicious then, it was just the atmosphere that surrounded her. People gave her things. Teachers, second chances, neighbors, rides. If I wanted something, I learned to ask myself first. If Talia wanted something, the whole living room became a family project. That pattern was what made my first business both possible and so complicated. At 14, I was retrieving every broken phone and old laptop that people in the neighborhood were going to throw away. I watched videos, took notes, and discovered I had a steady pulse and a particular calm for tiny screws. I'd sit at the kitchen table with a magnifying lamp clamped to the edge and tell Mom I was saving for a thing. She would shake her head at the chaos of cotton swabs, isopropyl alcohol, and a tray of screws that looked like glitter. Nico, at least put down a placemat. Your father eats at that table. Meanwhile, Talia would wander in, lift one of the screens, and stare at her reflection. Do you think this could be a mirror? It's very aesthetic. She would leave it unscratched, but then she would take my notebook to scribble an elaborate cursive T in the corner of my parts list. Her initials are still the ghost of the way our lives always overlapped. At 19, I took the leap. Someone in our town lost the lease on a small storefront between a laundromat and a bakery, and the landlord wanted to fill it fast. I was already cycling around with a backpack of tools, fixing things on people's kitchen tables for $40, and people kept saying, you should open a shop. The rent for that place was more money than I had ever seen at once. But the numbers worked out for me. If I had a sign, a counter, and a place where people could drop off their devices, I could do 10 times more work. I asked Mom if she would co-sign the lease. She shushed me as if the air might crack. Your father will think you're getting too big for your britches. Dad was silent at first, then he let out the phrase he always used when he didn't want to give a direct answer. How much are you willing to suffer for it? It wasn't permission, but it wasn't a no either. I found a way without them. I sold the only thing of value I had. A beat-up old car that I loved more for what it represented than for how well it ran. With that, I covered 3 months' rent in one bitter gulp. I bought a second-hand display case from a shop that had gone out of business, a cheap cash drawer, and a neon sign that glowed open, as if it were optimistic for both of us. The first week, I just watched the clock. The second week, the bakery owner next door brought me a broken blender. Then, a teacher brought me 3 carts of Chromebooks. A delivery man arrived with a phone so shattered it looked frosted, and I impressed myself by bringing it back to life. Word of mouth did what advertising couldn't. By the end of the year, I had paid back the microloan a community program had given me, stocked a tidy inventory, and learned to talk to people who were stressed, suspicious, and anxious about their data. I started to sleep the sleep of a person who doesn't owe money to anyone. At home, the temperature never matched the climate. On paper, Mom and Dad were proud. They showed their friends the small local article the paper had done about the young entrepreneur who fixes our digital lives. But the tone sometimes missed the mark. Dad couldn't help it. His advice was a nervous tick. Don't hire too fast, he would caution before asking how my day went. Don't buy anything you can't carry yourself. Mom's pride had a soft pity to it, as if I were playing house. It's good you're keeping busy, she would say while stirring a pot, until you figure out what you're really going to do. Talia planned around me like a dignitary, tutaying at my retail hours and saying with a sour tone, I could never do that. I need creative freedom. I need people. I always thought that if she spent one day with me behind the counter, dealing with the parade of personalities, the silent panic when someone thought their photos were gone forever, she would see there were more people there than she could handle. But I stopped trying to explain my days to her. It made her feel like she was losing an invisible race she hadn't trained for. The first hint that my work was making me an obligation rather than an adult came during Talia's 19th birthday. I had an urgent job that day. 12 school laptops I had to get back before exams. Because of that, I was late to the family lunch with a gift and a grease stain on my sleeve. The restaurant was one of those places that tries to be expensive by turning down the lights. Everyone was already seated. Mom in a cream-colored blouse, Dad in the shirt he wore for every important photo, Aunt Drea holding court, and Talia glowing as if she'd stepped out of an advertisement. There were balloons tied to her chair and a cake box on the credenza. I slid into my seat and apologized. Talia pouted for effect. We started without you. It was a joke, but it stuck with me. When the check came, the waiter placed it in the center of the table like a bouquet. Without missing a beat, Mom nudged it toward me with a finger, her eyes full of a kind of satisfied test. She didn't do it rudely. That was the worst part. It was automatic like muscle memory. I had cash as always, still stuck in the habit of paying suppliers in person. It would have been easy to just take it to confirm the story Mom had told herself about me and responsibility. But I hesitated. And in that hesitation, there was a breath of truth. They weren't proud. They were taking inventory. Dad rescued the moment by pulling the check closer. I'll get it, he said, but his eyes flicked to me quickly and expectantly, as if maybe I would offer to split it. The room shrank around the space where my hands weren't moving. Aunt Drea laughed her little musical laugh that manages to sound both kind and pointed at once. Look at our little businessman. He's frugal. Good sign. Talia looked at me with wide eyes as if to ask if I was serious. I kept my hands folded under the table and said in a firm voice, I'll get dessert. It was nothing. It shouldn't have meant anything. But as we stood up to leave, Mom squeezed my arm and whispered, Family helps family, Nico. Don't get used to hiding. The language of that day, what was said and what wasn't, hung around like fog. I started to notice smaller versions of it everywhere. If Aunt Drea's sink broke, suddenly I was the first one to get a call, not to fix the plumbing, but to negotiate a discount with a real plumber because I had business sense. If Talia wanted a new laptop for her creative work, it was expected that I would sell her one at cost or find a way. She loved that phrase, find a way, as if ways were printed like coupons on the back of my receipts. And when Mom's friend needed a phone unlocked, she'd bring it over in a grocery bag with a tin of cookies and say, You're so fast, honey. You'll do it with your eyes closed. I tried not to become a ledger book. I still brought over bread from the bakery next to my shop. I still did grocery runs for Mom when I got off late, but I started noticing how my generosity was narrated in the family. The strange alchemy by which voluntary kindness turned into expected duty. Dad would praise me to his colleagues as an example of good discipline, but then pull me aside to remind me about humility, and if I could sponsor Talia's trip to a weekend conference that might expand her network. Mom would swap stories with the neighbors about how my shop had saved a grandmother's photos, but then tell me it felt a little tacky to put my name on Talia's event sponsorship banner. It should be from the family, she'd say, drinking tea. You don't want it to look like you're buying affection. The banner at the conference read, Proudly supported by Talia's family. I kept the invoice in my file and told myself it didn't matter what other people saw. The first real blow, the one that made my shoulders tense when I thought of home, happened one Sunday that was supposed to be for rest. We were eating soup. The window was open. The smell of laundry detergent was drifting in from somewhere in the neighborhood. Talia was scrolling through her phone, laughing at something I couldn't see. I'm going to open an agency, she declared, her spoon suspended in midair. Consulting, content, branding. People want identity. Mom clasped her hands together as if she'd been told a secret from heaven. There it is, she whispered. That's your calling. You just need the right start. Dad nodded as if a simple motion of his head could build a foundation. Everyone needs a partner, he said to me as if reading from a script. And your sister has the vision. You have the structure. It's natural. Talia didn't look at me. She looked through me. Well, at least until I get it off the ground. Then I'll get clients who can actually pay. I smiled. That tight smile you learn as a customer service worker. The one that says I heard the words and carefully packed them away so they wouldn't get on me. I said I was stretched too thin, that my little counter was taking up all my attention, that it wasn't the right fit. Mom tilted her head as if I had missed a cue. Don't be petty, Nico. Think of the family. Talia finally looked up, smiling that radiant way advertisements have. It's sweet that you're trying to be independent, she said lightly. And the word, sweet, landed like a pebble in my shoe that I couldn't shake out. Dad stirred his soup and said, don't get too big for your britches. Which, in that moment, felt like the opposite of everything they were asking me to be. I know how this sounds. You might be thinking, okay, your family leaned on you. They pressured you. They wanted you to share. Isn't that what families do? And you'd be right, if it weren't for the way the ledgers kept shifting to make me smaller. If it weren't for how my no never counted, while Talia's maybe was treated as a resounding yes from the universe. If it weren't for how they kept measuring me by what I could undo for others rather than what I was building for myself. That was what prompted me to start putting things away. My receipts, my budgets, my plans. Not because I wanted to hide, but because I could feel the gravitational pull of a story that wasn't mine. They had a version of my life where I was the scaffolding. They were building a house for Talia, and I was supposed to be the beam you never see in the pictures. The first hint of where that story would twist came in a small, almost silly moment that bonded to a larger shadow. I had an envelope tucked behind a stack of old flyers on my desk at the shop. A small emergency fund I had started when I believed banks were for people who never feared an overdraft. It wasn't much now, but old habits die hard. One afternoon, Talia dropped by unannounced. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, something she does sometimes when she wants to feel like an event. She sat on my counter stool and spun slowly, like a child. I need a favor, she chirped. Her voice always became lighter right before she asked for something. My friend Mia's laptop. It's being rebellious. I told her you're a wizard. I took the laptop, logged it in, made my usual cheerful confession that I'm good but not a miracle worker, and told a joke until she laughed. We chatted while the system diagnostic ran. She told me about a brand proposal that might go through if another proposal went through. She told me a barista once gave her a free drink because he liked her earrings, which made her think about whether she should design earrings. It was the kind of conversation we always had, full of ideas like soap bubbles. Pretty until you touch them. When she went to the bathroom, I went to the back to check on a shipment. I came back to find Talia leaning over the counter, rummaging in the cubby where I kept pens, tape, and my work schedule. Her hand slid over the flyers, and I saw the corner of the envelope, my envelope, poking out in the wrong direction. I didn't say anything then. Maybe she was just looking for a pen. Maybe I was just being paranoid. She straightened up quickly and smiled a little too fast. You really should keep this place tidier, she chided playfully. It's going to embarrass you when you're famous. She left with a promise to tag my business in her story. The door closed behind her with that familiar jingle. Suddenly, the shop felt 2 sizes too small. That night, after I closed up, I counted the money in the envelope. It was short. Not a lot, not enough to make a scene. Enough to make me feel like I'd miscounted or spent something and forgotten. Enough to give me an easy out from the unease if I wanted it. I could have told myself a comforting lie and gone to sleep. But the lie got stuck on the way out and I just stood there with the envelope in my hands, feeling like someone had moved a painting in a room I knew blindfolded. I didn't accuse her. I didn't tell Mom. I just adapted. I moved the envelope somewhere else. I bought a small safe and wedged it under a stack of blank invoice paper. I started locking the back room even when I only stepped out front for 10 seconds. The trivial protections felt like wearing a helmet in a house, but they made that sense of disquiet calm down. The next week, when Talia dropped by with another friend and another favor, I was ready with smiles, forms, and small talk. She laughed. She hugged me from behind and told me I was the best brother, which sounded like a charm she pinched between her fingers before tossing it into a fountain. And so, in the gentle way that small things inflate into storms, the first real storm cloud arrived. Another Sunday. Another soup. This time the window was closed. Mom put her spoon down as if to punctuate something only she could hear. Talia's been invited to a retreat, she said, her eyes bright. It's in the mountains. There are coaches, mentors, contacts. The entrance fee is substantial. She said the last word as if it had angles. Dad cleared his throat and crossed his arms as if preparing to agree with whatever Mom said next. Talia looked at her phone, then looked up at me as if she had been cued to in a scene. It's an investment, she said. In my future. I waited. I knew my part in this play. And so did they. No one said it, but the expectation hummed between us, a small bee of assumption. I looked at the table, the small divot where Dad had once opened a bottle with a knife. I thought about my hours, my hands, my dream. I thought about that envelope that had come up short, and all the small ways I could be persuaded not to tire. I thought about how many times I had smoothed out a boundary to make someone else comfortable and called it love. Mom put her hand over mine in a way that used to comfort me when I was little. "Your sister deserves a good start," she murmured. And in those words, I heard the floorboards cracking under a weight I had not agreed to carry. I looked at Talia. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Dad added, "You're the practical one, Nico." As if practicality was a currency I was only meant to spend one way. The room went silent in the way rooms do when they've been edited to remove all the parts of you that belong to you. I opened my mouth, not even sure what I was going to say. Maybe a compromise, maybe a boundary, maybe a question about terms and clarity and the shape of that investment, when my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from my shop's landlord. "Call me when you can. There's something you should see." I looked at the three faces across the soup, the steam, and the familiarity. I had a feeling in my spine like the moment before a bridge gives out. I took the phone, and when I saw the photo he had sent, the front of my shop, the door ajar, and a small, neat note taped to the glass in handwriting I recognized like my own heartbeat, I felt the air narrow. The note was short. It used my name and began with the words, "Family helps family." The landlord's message was still burning in my hand, but I didn't open it again right away. I slid the phone into my pocket and forced myself to finish the meal, listening to Mom lay out all the reasons this retreat was exactly what Talia needed. Every point was framed like an investment proposal. Contacts, exposure, skills she could bring back to the family. But every time Mom said, the family, it was clear she meant her daughter, the one who could do no wrong. My role was simply to finance the vision. Dad kept nodding along, occasionally adding something like, "You only get these opportunities once, and if your sister wins, we all win." It sounded noble on the surface, but I could feel the weight of the unsaid. "If she fails, it will be your fault for not helping enough." I didn't commit. I told them I'd think about it, which was my way of saying I wasn't going to agree to this in the moment. Talia didn't press, but she didn't need to. She just smiled as if she already knew the outcome and went back to her phone, tapping out texts I imagined were updates to her friends about how she was going on a mountain summit for the weekend. After lunch, I drove straight to the shop. The sun was low and the light hit the front glass in a way that made the taped note almost glow. I stood outside for a long second before opening the door. The handwriting was unmistakable. Talia's looping, overly confident script. "Nico, I borrowed the emergency fund for the retreat deposit. I'll pay you back when my business takes off. Family helps family." I read it twice. The door was locked, but the deadbolt had been left open, which meant someone with a key, my key, had been inside. My stomach felt like a vice was turning. I checked the safe in the back. As expected, the envelope was gone. Not even any change, no note of IOU. Nothing but a faint scent of the vanilla lotion she always wore. I didn't call her. Not yet. I just sat in the back room staring at the wall while the hum of the bakery's fridge next door leaked in. The betrayal itself wasn't all the hurt. It was the certainty with which she had done it. As if my boundaries were paper doors she could walk through any time. She hadn't asked. She hadn't even left room for a no. She just assumed that, because she wanted something, I would be on board. Or if I wasn't, she would take it anyway. When I got home that night, the living room was full of laughter. Mom and Talia were on the couch looking at pictures of the retreat venue on the laptop. "It's beautiful, right?" Mom said without looking at me. "She's going to do so well there." Talia looked up, caught my eyes, and gave me the same smile she had given me at the restaurant earlier. The one that said, "We both know how this works." I didn't bring up the note. I didn't ask about the safe. Something in me knew that if I did, I would be outmaneuvered in seconds. Mom would smooth it over with a misunderstanding. Dad would make it about the bigger picture. And Talia would tilt her head and act as if I was being dramatic, maybe even joke about charging me interest when she paid me back. No. If I wanted my point to land, I would need proof, timing, and the kind of silence that makes people uncomfortable before the words arrive. Over the next week, I started noticing things that had probably always been there, but I had ignored. Mom talking about our business when she meant mine, but only in the context of how it could benefit Talia. Dad hinting that maybe I should branch out into marketing because your sister has the audience already. Talia coming into the shop with friends, using my counter as her personal hangout space, introducing me not as her brother, but as the tech guy who can fix anything because I trained him so well. She would say it with a laugh, and her friends would laugh too, assuming it was just a sibling joke. But I felt that same pebble in my shoe irritation every time. The retreat became the central topic of every conversation at home. Mom printed out the itinerary and taped it to the fridge as if it were a family vacation. Dad started talking about how, once Talia gets established, she can help you expand. Not an if, but a once. As if her success was inevitable and mine was just a stepping stone. 2 nights before she was due to leave, I got home late and found her in the driveway, leaning against my car. She was scrolling on her phone, the oversized sunglasses on again, even though it was dark out. "Hey," she said without looking up. "You don't mind if I take your car for the weekend, right? It's easier than renting one." I just stared at her. "You mean for the retreat?" She nodded, still on her phone. "Yeah, saves me money and I'll keep it clean." She said it as if she were doing me a favor. Something inside me shifted right then. Not an angry loud break, but the quiet kind you don't come back from. I knew in that moment that any line that existed between generosity and exploitation had been crossed miles ago, and they were still walking as if the path belonged to them. I told her I'd think about it. She smiled, patted the hood of my car and said, "I knew you'd agree." Later that night, I checked the security footage from my shop. I don't know what I expected. Maybe to prove myself wrong, to see someone else's face on the tape. But there she was, clear as day, walking in with her own key, heading straight for the back room without even a glance at the counter. She didn't hesitate. She didn't search. She went straight to the safe, pulled out the envelope, and slid it into her bag. She even stopped to fix her hair in the security monitor before she left. I sat there in the dark watching the video on a loop, my hands clenching around the edge of my desk. It wasn't just the theft. It was the ease, the comfort, the way she had moved through my space as if it were her own. Because in her mind it was. And that's when a stomach-churning realization hit me. If she could walk into my shop and take my savings without batting an eye, what else would she feel entitled to? What was stopping her from treating everything I had built as her personal springboard? The answer I knew was me. And I also knew they weren't going to like it when I finally drew that line. The morning of Talia's departure for the retreat started with an unusual amount of cheer in the house. Mom was in the kitchen making pancakes, something she only did on birthdays or when she was particularly pleased with herself. Dad was dressed as if for church, even though it was Friday. Talia was in the middle of the living room, suitcase open, clothes and accessories spilling out as if she were staging a photo shoot for a travel magazine. I walked in with my coffee and sat on the edge of the couch, trying to read the room. Everyone was buzzing with that particular energy families have when they're about to send someone off with too much praise and too few questions. "Oh, Nico," Mom said as if she had just remembered my existence. "Just in time. Could you help load her bags into your car?" I looked at her. "My car?" "Yes," she said, already flipping another pancake. "She's taking it up to the mountains. It's safer than renting. And that way she won't have to worry about a deposit." I kept my face blank. "We talked about this. I never said she could take it." Talia didn't even look up from folding a dress. "Mom said it would be fine." I put my coffee down on the table. The sound was sharper than I intended. "No. I didn't say it would be fine." Dad stepped in, his voice quiet but with that commanding tone he reserved for moments he wanted to end quickly. "Nico, it's family. You can't be stingy with trust. She'll bring it back in one piece." I almost laughed at that trust. After the safe, after the envelope, after her walking into my shop as if she owned it. But I didn't. I just said no. The room froze for an instant. Mom looked over her shoulder, spatula in the air. "Pardon." "No," I repeated more firmly. "I'm not lending her my car. She already took something from me without asking, and I'm not going to let it happen again." That got their attention. Talia's hands stopped over her suitcase. "What are you talking about?" "The money from my safe," I said. "For your retreat. I have the security footage of you taking it." Her expression didn't turn to guilt or apology. It hardened. "Oh my God, are you really going to make a scene about that? I told you I'd pay you back." "It's an investment." "It's theft," I corrected her. Mom cut in before I could say more. Her tone was sharp now. "Nico, don't use words like that. She's your sister. She needed help. And you've always had more than you need." That phrase hit me harder than I expected. More than you need. As if my work, my savings, my caution, and my long nights were a lucky accident I didn't deserve to keep. "I worked for that money," I said. "I didn't take it from anyone else. I didn't walk into someone else's business with a spare key and—" "Enough," Dad cut me off. "If you can't support your sister without making her feel guilty, maybe you should think about why you're so protective of your things. It's not healthy." Talia snapped her suitcase shut as if the conversation was over. "You're being dramatic. I'll bring your car back with a full tank." "Okay." She reached for the keys on the counter, And that's when something in me broke. Not a loud, angry break, but the quiet kind you don't come back from. I stepped in front and took them before she could. "You're not taking it," I said in a firm voice. "And after this, you're not welcome in my shop again without me there." The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was insult. Mom's face tightened as if she were holding back words. Dad looked at me as if I had just failed a silent test. Talia rolled her eyes and muttered, "Unbelievable." I thought that was the end of it. I thought maybe she would sulk, take the bus, and gossip to her friends about how unreasonable I was. But when I went to the shop later that day to get ahead on work before the weekend, my stomach dropped the moment I rounded the corner. The door was ajar. I ran inside. The counter computer was gone. My display case was empty. Every repair ticket, every customer device, had vanished. The back room had been stripped of my tools, the safe, my personal laptop. It was as if the shop had been vacuumed out in under an hour. On the counter, there was a single folded note. My name on the front. Inside, written in the same looping script as last time, "This is just a loan. I'll pay you back when my business takes off. Don't overreact. Family helps family." I stood there holding the note, looking at the empty shell of everything I had built since I was 19, feeling the slow, sinking realization that this wasn't just a sister crossing a line. This was an open declaration that none of what I had was mine in her eyes. I stayed in the middle of my shop long after the bakery next door turned off its lights. The smell of bread faded into the smell of dust and nothing. My hands were still holding that note. But it felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Every shelf I had stocked, every tool I had saved up for, every repair ticket waiting to be finished, it was gone. I knew insurance wouldn't cover most of it. The policies I could afford didn't protect against internal disputes or consensual access. The landlord's security camera only covered the front sidewalk, not the inside. And if I called the police, well, I already knew how that conversation would go. It wouldn't be theft in their eyes, not with her having a key. It would be a family matter. That phrase, family matter, kept echoing in my head all the way home. When I pulled into the driveway, the house lights were off. No one was waiting for me. No one had called to see if I had seen the shop yet. It was as if they knew exactly what had happened and were just letting the silence do the work. I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in my car for over an hour, the street light buzzing above me, my morning coffee still half full in the cup holder. I replayed the last several years in my mind. The sacrifices, the missed dinners, the way I had learned to patch holes in my own roof before I called anyone for help. And how every step I had taken forward had been treated like a communal bank account they could withdraw from whenever it suited them. For the next week, I operated on autopilot. I still opened the shop, what was left of it, because I couldn't afford to close down completely. Customers came in, some asking where their repairs were, others offering sympathy once they noticed the bare shelves. I lied more than I told the truth. Remodeling, I'd say. Updating inventory. I didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of knowing I had been robbed by my own sister. At home, it was business as usual for everyone else. Mom would chatter about Talia's transformative retreat as if it were the second coming. Dad would remind me at dinner that resentment is a debt you pay twice. Talia messaged once, a casual promise that, "I'll have your stuff back soon." I didn't reply. Instead, I started clearing space, not just in the shop, but in my head. I went through every drawer and cabinet at home and packed up anything that couldn't be replaced. Important documents went into a fireproof safe I bought with the few savings I still had. I changed the locks on my apartment door without telling anyone, though Mom complained when she came over and her spare key no longer worked. At the shop, I started keeping a double ledger, one on paper and one digital, both off-site. I stopped telling them about big jobs, new clients, or how much I was making. I didn't know exactly what my plan was yet, but I knew it would start with this. No one in my family would ever have unfiltered access to my life again. But late at night, when the streets were quiet and the hum of my old fridge was the only sound in my apartment, I would let the weight settle. I would think about the years I spent building something from nothing, only to have it plundered by the one person who should have had my back. I would think about how my parents looked at me, not as a son, but as an endless source of help they never had to earn. And every time those thoughts came, I would see that empty shop floor in my mind. The silence, the hollow shelves, the note in her handwriting. That image stopped hurting after a while. It started sharpening into something else entirely, because the more they thought I was just licking my wounds, the more time I had to build. Something they wouldn't see coming. It's strange how quickly the ground can feel solid again once you stop expecting certain people to hold you up. The first step to my recovery wasn't rebuilding the shop exactly as it was. It was cutting the dead weight. I ended the lease a month earlier than planned, selling what little was left to a friend in the repair business. It hurt to leave the place, but the thought of pouring more money into a space where Talia had walked in and gutted me felt like keeping an old wound open. Instead, I changed course. An old client, a small business owner named Marco, offered me a corner of his computer parts warehouse for a fraction of what I had been paying in rent. The deal came with 2 perks: a shared security system with full interior cameras and the kind of door lock key that couldn't be borrowed from a family member. I set up a small workstation in the back, started taking appointments by referral only, and kept everything lean. I didn't even put up a sign at first. Word of mouth was my filter. Without the rent eating up most of my income, my savings started to recover faster than I expected. I stopped thinking in terms of survival and started thinking in terms of influence. By the 3rd month, I had invested in a portable setup that allowed me to do on-site repairs for businesses. It turned out people paid a lot more for convenience, and soon I had regular contracts with a law firm, a boutique hotel, and a photography studio. Meanwhile, my personal life became a fortress. I cut family dinners in half, always with an excuse: late jobs, client emergencies, networking events. The less I showed up, the less they seemed to keep up with me. And when I did see them, I spoke in vague, non-committal updates. Work's good, keeping busy, nothing new. I could see the curiosity on their faces, especially Talia's. She hated not knowing. What she didn't know was that I was building something far bigger than my old shop ever was. By the 6th month, I partnered with Marco to launch an online store selling refurbished electronics and hard-to-find replacement parts. He handled the logistics. I handled the repairs and quality checks. We split the profits clean, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had control and momentum. The best part: my income was now invisible to anyone who thought they were entitled to it. Every cent went into a separate account they didn't know about, with a business entity registered under a name that wouldn't ring a bell. If they looked, all they would see was the closed storefront and maybe some ghost mentions of me doing small side jobs. It was no longer just about money. It was about space. Mental, emotional, and physical. I started going to the gym before work just to burn off the frustration built up from years of being treated as the family's resource rather than a member. I learned to cook more than 3 decent meals, something I had always put off because I was too busy. I even took a short trip to the coast, 3 days of doing nothing but walking by the water, with my phone on silent. The more I pulled away, the more they seemed to notice in subtle ways. Mom started calling instead of texting. Dad started asking more specific questions about my work, as if he was fishing for details he once took for granted. And Talia, well, Talia showed up at the warehouse once, uninvited, pretending she was in the neighborhood. She looked around as if trying to map the place out in her head. I gave her the tour, but only of the front office, nowhere near where the real work happened. Her smile was tight when she left. That's when I knew she suspected I was doing better than I was letting on. And I was fine with that, because by then I had enough distance, enough security, and enough silent progress that even if she guessed the truth, she couldn't touch it. But I also knew something else. People like Talia don't simply give up when they think they're owed something. They look for the next opportunity. They wait. That's why, when the next family emergency came knocking, I was prepared in a way they didn't see coming. It started with a call from my mother on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was in the middle of a bulk order for the photography studio, 30 laptops being wiped for an event, and my phone buzzed with her name. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something about the timing felt deliberate. Her voice was syrupy at first, as it always was when she was trying to introduce something unpleasant. "Nico, honey, how's work? Keeping busy?" She barely let me answer before her tone shifted into what I recognized as her serious news voice. "Your father and we've been worried. Your sister's business has been struggling these past few months. She's having a hard time talking about it, but she's in a bit of a financial jam." I almost laughed. A jam? That was inevitable. I had heard through a mutual acquaintance that Talia's branding agency was more a collection of unpaid interns and coffee shop brainstorming sessions than anything profitable. But I kept my voice neutral. "And she's facing some legal issues," Mom continued, lowering her voice as if she were sharing classified information. "A client is saying she didn't deliver what she promised and they're threatening to sue. If that happens, it could ruin her reputation before she's even started." I waited, because I knew what was coming. "We were thinking," she said slowly, "that maybe you could step in, offer her some kind of partnership. If her business was under your established name, it could give her credibility. You've always been the sensible one. You could help her get back on her feet. It would be good for the family." There it was again. The family. Always the phrase that meant I was supposed to put my own life on hold to fix theirs. I told her I'd think about it and we hung up. But instead of dismissing it entirely, I started asking quiet, indirect questions. Through my business contacts, I learned that Talia's legal trouble wasn't just a threat, it was real. One of her clients had filed a formal complaint and she was in danger of being blacklisted from a major local business network. If that happened, she wouldn't just lose clients. She would lose the appearance of being legitimate. That's when I saw it. The opportunity. If Talia needed credibility, she would eventually have to come to me. And when she did, I would make sure the terms were entirely in my favor. I wasn't thinking about money anymore. I already had that under control. This was about leverage, about setting a precedent that the days of me being their safety net were over. In the following weeks, I positioned myself carefully. I discreetly expanded my online store's reach into some of the same marketing circles Talia claimed as her territory. I started going to networking events for small businesses that she used to frequent, showing my face, making connections. People started associating my name not just with technical work, but with broader business solutions. If anyone asked about Talia, I gave polite, non-committal answers. I never badmouthed her, but I didn't defend her either. I let the silence do the heavy lifting. And then, almost predictably, the call came, not from Mom this time, but from Talia herself. She sounded different. Gone was the casual, overly confident tone. This was cautious, measured. Hey, I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. I think we could help each other out. I agreed, but I chose the spot. Neutral territory, a quiet cafe near the coast where I knew we wouldn't run into anyone she knew. She arrived 15 minutes late, wearing a blazer that was too dressy for the occasion. She got straight to the point. Her client list had shrunk. The complaint was hurting her chances of getting new work and she believed that partnering with me could solve both of our problems. Only, as she laid it out, I could see that her version of partnering was just sliding into my infrastructure and using my reputation like a borrowed suit. She framed it as temporary, but I knew better. I nodded, asked a few pointed questions about her finances, her processes, her contracts, and she answered more openly than I expected. In fact, she gave me something I hadn't anticipated, a clear picture of just how precarious her situation was. The kind of information that could be used, if necessary, to turn the tables completely. At the end of the meeting, I told her I would think about it. And as I watched her walk away, clutching her oversized bag as if it were full of secrets, I knew two things. First, she was desperate enough to agree to almost any terms. Second, that if I played my cards right, I could make sure she never again had the power to take anything from me. And maybe, just maybe, I could make her give back what she had already taken. When I finally called Talia, my tone was warm, even encouraging. I told her I'd been thinking about her proposal and that I had an idea, one that could give her the credibility she needed and generate stable income for both of us. I framed it as a win-win, even though I already knew the real winner would be me. We met again, this time at my warehouse office. I kept the actual workspace locked up, seating her in the front area where I had set up a tidy desk, a couple of plants, and a corkboard with generic business goals. I slid a folder across the desk, partnership paperwork I had drafted with a trusted lawyer. She thumbed through it, frowning at some of the clauses. Full financial oversight? She asked. It's standard for brand partnerships, I said smoothly. It keeps everything transparent. Clients like to know we're on the up and up. And this about asset ownership? That's just to make sure we protect the brand, I replied. Anything under the partnership, contracts, equipment, client lists, belongs to the business entity until the agreement ends. It prevents disputes. I could see the hesitation in her eyes, but desperation is louder than caution. She signed. Over the next 2 months, I absorbed her agency into my operations. On paper, she was a partner. In reality, she had no access to client funds without my approval, no ability to take on projects without permission, and no way to hide income. I brought in my own accountant to streamline her accounts, which quickly revealed how thin her margins really were. I started by honoring her existing contracts, delivering on them on time and to a higher standard than she had been offering. Clients noticed. Some shifted their communication to me entirely, ignoring her. She smiled through it, telling herself it was part of the process. Then came the subtle changes. I rebranded the agency under my business's name, keeping her title as creative director, but making myself the CEO. I rewrote the marketing copy to highlight our technical expertise and business reliability, pushing her role further into the background. And every time we landed a new client, I made sure the invoicing went through systems she didn't control. The final piece came when one of her biggest clients, ironically, the very one who had filed the complaint, reached out to me directly. They had seen the changes and wanted to renew their contract, but only if they could work exclusively through my side of the business. I agreed, of course, and discreetly moved them over to my separate, non-partnership division. By the 4th month, the numbers were clear. The joint business was thriving, but almost all of that success was coming from my infrastructure. Her old clients were completely mine now, or had been replaced by others who paid better. And per the contract she had signed, everything, the equipment, the accounts, the branding, belonged to the entity I controlled. When I finally called her into the office, I kept a professional tone. Talia, I think it's time we talk about dissolving the partnership. You've done great creative work, but the business's direction is clearly leaning toward the technology and operational side. I'm happy to buy out your share. She looked at me as if I had spoken another language. Buy out my share? You mean keep my agency? I slid the contract across the desk to her, pointing out the relevant clause. It hasn't been yours for months. You gave up ownership of the assets when we merged. Her face went pale. You set me up. I held her gaze steadily. No. I gave you an out. You took it. And now you're free to start over without using anything that belongs to this business. It was calm, clean, totally legal. And for the first time in years, I watched her walk out of a room without that smug certainty she always carried. Because now she knew she had lost something she couldn't simply walk in and take. The fallout started faster than I expected. 2 days after Talia walked out of my office, I got a string of furious texts from Mom. Long paragraphs about betraying your own blood, humiliating your sister, and putting business before family. Dad followed with a single sentence that was meant to sting. I didn't raise you to be cold. I didn't reply to either of them. The reality hit Talia harder than the emotional outrage. Within a week, she realized she couldn't legally use her old agency name. It was now my property. The client list she thought she could fall back on was also mine. She tried to poach a few, but the contract she had signed barred her from soliciting them for a year, and I didn't hesitate to remind her of that in writing. Her reputation in the local business network crumbled. The word got around, not because I said anything malicious, but because people noticed the shift in where the results were coming from. The same contacts who once sang her praises were now reaching out to me directly. Meanwhile, my business hit a new rhythm. Without her, there was no friction, no drama, just work, growth, and a quiet satisfaction. I expanded the online store, hired 2 part-time assistants, and secured a long-term contract with a photography studio that had first trusted me with their repairs. At family gatherings, the air grew thick. Mom avoided my eyes. Dad remained polite but distant. And Talia, she was quieter than I had ever seen her. Her usual effortless charm was replaced by clipped answers and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She still tried once, just once, to make a cutting remark about how I had taken over her dream. I didn't even bother to defend myself. I just said calmly, I didn't take anything you didn't hand over yourself. She didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. Months later, I ran into her on the street. She was dressed casually. No blazer, no oversized sunglasses, carrying a single grocery bag. She gave me the smallest of nods, not quite friendly, not quite hostile, more like she had finally accepted something she never wanted to admit, that I was no longer a resource she could drain, and that the power dynamic had changed forever. I didn't stop. I didn't look back, because the truth was simple. I had built my life once before, and I could build it again. But this time, they could never get their hands on it. And as I walked away, I realized something even better.